to introduce Leslie Cooper, who's one of the lawyers who is on the team, who's not up front. Josh Block, who argued the case this morning in the Fourth Circuit. Gavin Grimm, our plaintiff, and Gail Deedy, who is the ACLU of Virginia's Women's Rights Legal Fellow. And we're going to start, and Josh is going to speak, and then Gavin will speak, and then Gail will speak, and then we'll take some questions.
Hi, thank you everyone for coming here. My name's Josh Block. I'm a senior staff attorney at the National ACLU's LGBT and HIV project. This is the latest step in a really long journey for Gavin and his family. As many of you have seen on video clips, Gavin, before he met anyone from the ACLU, was standing up by himself at a school board meeting in front of a room of hostile adults, explaining why he should have the right that everyone else has to just use the bathroom in peace. And from there, he's endured another school board meeting. He's put himself out there in the press to make sure this type of thing doesn't happen to any other kid. We've been in Norfolk together, and this is the latest journey, and I've been so proud to stand by Gavin through all these steps. It is a tremendously difficult experience for anyone, an even more difficult experience for a kid, and Gavin is an absolute inspiration. So without further ado, Gavin has some prepared remarks, and we're going to turn it over to him.
Standing at the school board meeting last year was equal parts humiliating and terrifying. Humiliating because at age 15, I had to witness adults of my community discussing in public forums some rather intimate details of my anatomy. In plainer words, the anatomy of a 15-year-old was considered appropriate for public conversation by the Gloucester County School Board. For any kid, that would be mortifying. However, for a kid who is transgender, bringing to the forefront of people's minds the very part of themselves that already makes them dysphoric is incomparably distressing. I sat by while people repeatedly called me a girl. She, her, young lady, confused young lady, even freak. Bullying is already an enormous problem for high school-age youth, and especially transgender youth. To hear adults of my community treat me as if I was a creature for their ridicule and observation, or some oddity on a stage, was incredibly dehumanizing to an extent I could not possibly convey. And of course, I was terrified, firstly because the school board had the power to bar me from the correct restroom for the rest of my time at Gloucester High School. Secondly, because I was in a room full of adults who thought it appropriate to have this sort of vulgar discussion, who would clap or cheer after every derogatory statement, of which there were many. After enduring all of that, twice, I felt as though I couldn't possibly take any more hits. But I did, because at the end of the school board meetings, my school board chose to enact a policy that would further alienate and stigmatize me by forcing me to use separate restrooms from all of the other students at the school. For me, the thought of going into a separate restroom, which might as well have been labeled other, was just far too much to bear. The trek to the restroom in the nurse's office each time it was necessary was similarly humiliating, similarly upsetting, and othering and dysphoria-inducing. The only difference was that it was just slightly less conspicuous. I am fighting this fight because no kid should have to think so hard about performing a basic and private function of being alive. No kid struggling to be accepted and struggling to accept themselves should have to simultaneously battle for the right to use the correct bathroom. That is why I have come to this point. I hope that I will be one of the last kids that have to go through something like this, and I'm going to do what I can to ensure that.
Gail?
Hi everyone, my name is Gail Deedy. I'm the Secular Society Women's Rights Legal Fellow at the ACLU of Virginia, and I work on litigation on LGBT-related cases and women's rights cases. The ACLU of Virginia is so proud to represent Gavin, and so inspired by his ability to stand up on behalf of students in Virginia who are transgender and are going through the same experiences as he is, but may not be able to come out and ask for help. Students in Virginia who are transgender deserve the same educational opportunities as every other student, and that includes using the restrooms that are consistent with the gender that they live in every day. Gavin is a boy, and Gavin deserves to use the boys' restroom in school and not have to feel stigmatized or that he's different or that there's something wrong with him by being forced to use a separate restroom. And we are so happy to be able to help him with this fight.
take some questions. If you'd identify yourselves when you ask a question, just for the courtesy of our out-of-town folks and for Gavin, that would be great. Anybody have a question?
I'm Kristen Smith with Channel 8 here in town. Just based on what you heard in the courtroom today, how do you think things went? I mean, it was interesting to hear what the different justices were asking.
So I'll answer that. So you learned a long time ago not to try to predict what a decision is going to be based on oral argument. You know, all the judges seemed very engaged on the issue and very steeped in all the materials, and we're looking forward to seeing what they write from it. But we can't, you know, hazard a guess beyond that.
And Craig Harper with WCBE, your arguments were very brief. You didn't use all your time. Was there a reason for that?
Oh, I think I did. I might have ended with 5 seconds on the clock to spare. No, I think that, you know, both sides got a chance to put forward all their arguments, and you know, we felt that the court was very engaged throughout.
Brad Kuttner with the RDA. Something I keep thinking about whenever I read about this case, you know, the third bathroom created the idea of a separate but equal facility. Is that a comparison to be made here, or is that a bit of a stretch?
Well, I guess Gavin could talk about how it makes him feel. I mean, I don't think it is under any, even if you were going to use a separate but equal framework, it's clearly not equal. It's a bit like basically a restroom that from a converted closet that only Gavin has to use because other people hypothetically, you know, object to even being in the same restroom with him. So it is separate, but it's certainly not equal. And you know, Gavin can talk about how, you know, distressing it is.
Yeah, I mean, legally I can't draw a comparison to any other situation that's going on or has gone on in the world, but I can say that leaving me with only the option of a separate other facility is certainly, I mean, it's just not correct. It's, you know, it's stigmatizing, it's dehumanizing, it's basically saying there's something wrong with you that makes it so that you cannot use the restroom like any other kid, and the idea that the female bathroom is an option for me is something that I can't fathom.
Gavin McNeil with Virginia Capital News Network. Justice Davis at one point talked about how the principal had done everything in her power to accommodate you and how fair the principal had been. Did you feel that way throughout all of this?
So I can't really speak to exactly, you know, the fairness of the situation at hand, because I don't want to pass judgment on anyone that's in my school, because I do appreciate my school system. But I feel as though the allowance of a converted closet into a unisex facility being considered the appropriate response in the equal opportunity, you know, the equal bathroom as you know, as compared to the other children, was certainly not appropriate and certainly not sufficient.
Matt Demline, WRVA Radio here in Richmond. How does it feel to be the focal point of this fight as just a high school student?
So I can say I did not set out to make waves. I set out to use the bathroom, and it's scary, and it's not easy. But I will do my best to help anyone I can.
And you know why we highlighted Gavin as one of our profiles in courage in our annual report this year.
Gavin, where does all the emotion come from?
Well, I mean, just my years of being, you know, not being able to express myself as I am, and then finally being able to be myself, and I'm met with so much resistance when, you know, transitioning was just the most cathartic thing in the world. I was able to be myself, and I was able to live authentically, and then suddenly I'm having people tell me, no, there's this major aspect in your life that you are going to be discriminated in. And, you know, for it to be on public blast, it's humiliating. It's not something I wanted everybody to know. It's personal, and it's not, it's just very humiliating for me.
We've talked several times, and you've always said, this isn't about you, this is about for the students who come after you. I mean, you're a senior now, right? Where are you at? You're a junior.
I'm a junior.
Okay, so
I had to
junior.
think about that one.
This might all be done by the time you are gone. So how important is it to make sure that this gets right before you leave?
It is my personal, I couldn't say priority because I have no control over the speed that this happens at, but it is my personal hope that this will be resolved before I leave the school so that something, I mean, anything can be done to prevent this kind of situation from happening again.
I'm just curious how you went from enduring the humiliation at that school board meeting to now becoming a champion of the cause and the effort to make this right.
So, in a sense, I was sort of thrust into this world. It's a hot button issue, and people wanted to hear about it. And at first, I was terrified, and I wanted to run away from it all. But then I realized I have a platform now, and that platform can help people. And I am just not the kind of person that will roll over and let myself be discriminated against. And when I see an opportunity to help others, I'm going to take that opportunity.
The other thing Gavin has that a lot of transgender kids don't have is two very supportive parents who are here with him today and stand with him every day.
Absolutely. Without my parents being behind my back every step of the way, I couldn't have gotten this far.
For you, is this about more than using the restroom? Is this about just equal opportunity in general?
Well, I mean, of course, using the restroom is considered the focal point of this issue, but beyond that, the situation that, I am banned from a sex-specific or a gender-specific place certainly takes a big part of this issue for me. It's, to me, this is one way that the school is saying we don't believe that who you are is legitimate, and that is something that is very offensive to me.
You've been very patient.
Hey, Gary Robertson of Reuters. First, just an incidental thing. What is your DOB, date of birth?
You don't need to tell them your date of birth on a public record.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. How old are you now? Are you 16 now?
I'm 16, yes.
How would you characterize your day at Gloucester High School these days? Is there support for you? Not so much? How would you characterize it?
I try to avoid any potentially aggressive or confrontational situation. I don't like going to school. It's not something I look forward to. It's, at times something I do my best to get out of. I'm sure everyone's dealt with, I have a headache, that kind of thing. But for me, it's very real. I do wake up with a headache or a stomach ache because I'm so anxious and so just not looking forward to going to school. And I don't really have voice support within my peer base, but I don't necessarily have a voiced opposition either. It's just the elephant in the room that no one really talks about, which I think in some ways is a little bit worse because I'm not sure where I stand with certain people.
Is there at all a chance that the Fourth Circuit could reverse the injunction and you could begin to use the men's bathroom in school? Possibility?
Yeah, so that's the relief we're requesting. So we had a motion for preliminary injunction with the district court. That was filed the day after the end of the sophomore year, and the hope was that he'd be able to at least have a new start in his junior year. And when that was denied, we're asking the Fourth Circuit to issue that injunction instead. He's already starting the second semester of his junior year, and it likely takes a couple months before courts issue decisions. So, hopefully he'll at least be able to start his senior year using the same restroom.
I'm with the Times-Dispatch. There's some talk about the case going back and some more hearings before the district court. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So what a preliminary injunction is, it says while the rest of the case is litigated, this person needs immediate interim relief. And it's sort of based on a forecast of likelihood of success. What the other side was asking, we appealed the denial of a preliminary injunction. The other side was asking for the whole case to be dismissed. So not just deny the injunction, but say there's no claim here. And they seem to be, several of the questions indicated that they thought that the underlying claim should go ahead, which is what the district court appeared to say for the equal protection claim. And at least that's explaining what those questions were directed at.
So will we have to go back to the court in Norfolk before coming back to Richmond before moving forward?
Well, after Court of Appeals rules, in order to grant an injunction, they, also say what they think the likelihood of success is, and they indicate what issues need to be like fleshed out as the case moves forward. You know, and then I think both sides, you know, assess where things stand in light of what the Court of Appeals has said. But it is true that, you know, preliminary injunction is the beginning of the case, not the end of the case.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, back here.
Captain Karen with the Quality Case Files. This is a question for Joshua. What did you make of all of the questions coming from Niemeyer about intersex and the apparent conflation of intersex and transsexual?
Oh, I mean, I don't know what.
Transgender. I mean, didn't seem to get that there's a distinction. Was that your impression?
I wouldn't say that. I mean, I don't want to. I don't know what. I think judges ask questions for all sorts of reasons. I think the fact that this is a panel that, you know, is aware that intersex people exist and that trans people exist is itself an important fact, because, you know, one of the primary motivators of this sorts of discrimination is just lack of familiarity and lack of understanding. And this seems to be a panel that, whatever way they rule, seem to be very, you know, engaged in the issues. And
hello, Dominic Holden, BuzzFeed News. The brief seeking the appeal sought that the case be remanded to a different district court. That didn't come up during oral arguments, and I'm wondering why not.
I don't think it's surprising that it didn't come up. I think, you know, it's always unusual for an appellate court to reassign a case, and I think that depends on, you know, a variety of factors that, you know, rest with a lot of discretion with the appellate court. I think, you know, we made our arguments in the brief, and the judges are well aware of those arguments, and they'll make their own decision. But it's not usually something that benefits from talking with counsel about that. You know, they know what they're going to do about that, and they don't need my help.
You mentioned sort of you mentioned the process, and the injunction is the beginning of the process. How long do you think it will take before there's ultimate resolution to this case? And then once that happens, what is the precedent that will set?
Well, so on the first question, you know, like I said, you know, I think parties take stock of where they stand after, you know, a preliminary injunction decision, you know, comes down. And in some respects, sometimes the writing is on the wall one way or another, and so sometimes cases settle afterwards, sometimes they go on and you litigate it to final judgment. So it's hard to, you know, in the abstract say that. And then you were asked about precedent from it. So, you know, as we've said, you know, this is the first federal court of appeals that's, you know, addressing this issue. It only is, you know, binding precedent in the Fourth Circuit, which is, you know, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and North and South Carolina. But in some respects, it'll be a bellwether, and that it'll be the only data point out there for, you know, other courts to look at and for other school boards to look at when they're looking at these sorts of decisions across the country. So, you know, obviously, you know, when a school board, you know, in a different part of the country is faced with a similar situation, and someone tries to tell them, oh, you know, don't worry what DOJ says, don't worry what DOE says, don't worry what the ACLU says, they'll be looking at what happened in this case, to not just in courts, but in whether they do the right thing in the first instance.
I'm going to go to Warren, and I'm going to come over here. Warren?
Larry.
Larry, I'm sorry, Larry.
Yeah. Yeah, Josh, you mentioned that this is the first time that a federal appeals court has decided this particular issue. Are there other federal appeals courts that have decided similar issues to this, but on different issues other than Title IX?
Yeah, so I mean, there are many courts of appeals that have said that discriminating against someone because they're transgender is discrimination against them on the basis of sex under both Title VII and the Equal Protection Clause and other civil rights statutes that protect against sex discrimination. In terms of the context of access to restrooms, there are fewer cases. There are a couple district court cases out there, and very recently the EEOC issued a decision which is binding on the whole federal government, just making clear that, you know, excluding someone from a restroom consistent with their gender identity sort of deprives them of, equal employment. And I think that the reasoning in that case was essentially adopted and reaffirmed by the Department of Education in explaining why they, support Gavin's case too. But, sir.
If any of these rulings gone against your side, nationally?
So there's a district court. There's a district court decision interpreting Title IX access to restrooms that was issued before DOE took a position on how they interpret their regulations, and that decision went the other way. It's been appealed, and based on court filings, it looks like the parties are in advanced settlement discussions. But that's the only directly on point going the other direction on Title IX.
The Johnson case the other lawyer referred to.
Yeah, Johnston versus
Pennsylvania.
University of
Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Susan with NBC 12 here in Richmond. I have a question for Gavin. To a lot of folks out there, you're a hero. What would you say to maybe some other transgender kids who don't have the support that maybe you do and find themselves kind of alone, kind of like an island?
Well, I can address that firstly by giving a little bit of a personal anecdote. I felt like that for a very long time, and I would just say that there are people out there. You can, try to reach out. There's, communities online. There's communities in your community, and reaching out can help that process along a lot. It can help you feel accepted and supported, and it can help you feel like there's other people like you. And as far as, people that don't have that support and words for them, I just would like them to know that life goes on and it continues, and you will at one point have a chance to be yourself if you just stick it out and advocate for yourself wherever you can.
Are you aware, Gavin, that there are cases popping up all over the country? I think we ran a story yesterday somewhere in the Midwest about transgender students sort of wanting to use the bathroom. Are you aware when there's things happening? Are you kind of watching closely?
I wouldn't say I'm necessarily watching closely. When I go home and kick off my shoes, I'm just Gavin. I try not to let this encompass all of my life, and so I would say yes, that I'm aware that I've, other people certainly. I can't imagine that there's no other trans people in the world that are, trying to use the bathroom. So it doesn't come as a surprise to me at all that these cases are popping up. I couldn't cite any specific case, but I am aware that there are some.
Hi, I'm Margolin, MSNBC. Josh, can you explain the significance of Judge Davis's preoccupation with whether the district judge's denial of the preliminary injunction changed the status quo? It seemed to be there was some disagreement with Judge Niemeyer saying, no, the policy was the status quo, and it wasn't changed with the denial of the preliminary injunction. I was just a little bit confused on that point.
Sure. So, one of the purposes of a preliminary injunction is to maintain the status quo while the litigation moves forward. But the standard isn't what's the status quo at the time you file suit. The standard is what was the status quo ante before the dispute itself arose. And so sometimes that means you have to reverse what's been done, but that restores the status quo instead of changing it. So there's a so that's what the discussion was about, and that was something that was argued below. Although the other side appeared to concede at court during arguments today that for those purposes, our side is maintaining the status quo, and it's subject to that standard, not the heightened standard for something that changes it. But probably the least interesting aspect of the discussion today.
A couple of wrap-up questions. Anybody else?
I do
Gary?
not know what the term intersex means. Can you define that, please?
Sure. Intersex is a condition. There's a spectrum of conditions, and that involve people who have traits of both sexes. So someone born with ambiguous genitalia might be a person who's intersex. There are other times where people are born without receptors for various types of hormones, which create intersex conditions. There are people who have XXY chromosomes. So there's a vast array of it. It's not simply male or female.
Yeah. A little bit broader question here. Judge Davis spoke a lot about the changing definition of gender. Can you talk a little bit about how that's sort of changing with cases like this, and sort of how it's going to affect policymaking down the road?
Sure, sure. I mean, part of it is the science has changed. You know, at the time, you know, that it was called transsexualism, but that wasn't included in the APA's like manual until the late 70s. It's only fairly recently that especially students are able to get the medically necessary care that they need at this age. You have students on hormone blockers before they hit puberty. You have students on cross-hormone therapy like Gavin, and this is a real pressing issue with real people, and they need to use the bathroom. It's not just an abstract question. But you know, one of the lines from all the marriage litigation that went on 2 years ago was, this is one of the first courts to rule on it, said it's not the Constitution that's changed, it's our understanding of what it means to be gay and lesbian. And I think a similar dynamic is happening here. You know, it's not, you know, the sex discrimination laws that have changed, it's that we're able to understand what it means to be transgender and see that as any other type of sex discrimination instead of some, you know, separate category.
Craig?
You can answer this or not if you're not comfortable with it, but this case comes at a time when people are working in the LGBT community are working to change hearts and minds about what is normal. And it sounds to me like many in the community, including you, don't feel abnormal. You're made to feel that way by society. What do you say? What would you say to I'm just like everybody else? What would you say to?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I'm just, you know, like anybody else. Some people are born with, you know, a club foot or a hole in their heart. You don't choose how you're born and what kinds of challenges you'll have later in life because of that. And you know, I'd say that being transgender is not something that's necessarily fun all the time, and it's not something that everyone necessarily wants to be that is trans. But as far as the question of normal, we know, especially with the human condition, there's such a broad range of experiences and realities for human beings that I don't think the category of normal is something we can really put people into.
That sounds like a good place to end. All right, thank you all very much. Thank you for being civil and kind.
A very articulate hearing. I'm proud of you.
I know, and one more thing, so where are we, what's next, like as a reporter, like our planning status, so when should we be looking for, do you expect a decision in 6 weeks, 6 months?
I'd say the average is between